Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Stars with Occult Explorers. I'm your hostess, Snappy, and I'm joined by my co host, Dion. How's it going, Dion?
Life is great. Life is great. Glad to be here one more week.
Amazing. Awesome. So, for this particular episode, we want to give a special warning. It's going to get a little bit graphic today because we're going to be getting into some ancient blood rites. Isn't that right, Dion?
Yeah. Dracula, the Bible, ancient Greece. So yeah, trigger warning.
Yeah,
More
definitely a
body
trigger warning.
fluids.
But we're specifically we're looking at how they were utilizing the blood in various rituals and various rites. And just to start that off, like we're thinking about this, when I think about blood rituals and blood sacrifice, the first thing that's coming to mind is that popular cultural image of Dracula, right?
Oh yeah. You know, um, think about it. Blood is electric. It conducts a electrical charge through the iron. Um, and so we got these myths about the power of blood over time. You want to go to the first picture.
Right.
And here we got this classical image of Dracula.
With
Um,
his bride.
we know this is Hollywood. This is the Hollywood version, the black and white version. Um, and there was Vlad Shepes in history, the real Dracula. You know, uh, and when you research the mythology of it or the history of Vlad Shepes, all this is different. He didn't do none of this, but he was an evil guy.
This is what I wanted to ask you about. So, because the stereotypical myth, as we understand it, is always this ingestion of blood, usually young virginal blood, in order to live forever, right? We have the classic vampire of Dracula from Bram Stoker. We have the retellings of the story of Elizabeth Bathory, right? Like it's a pretty pervasive idea. And then, of course, like you were saying, in Hollywood, they expand on this like crazy modern novels. Vampires are probably one of the most popular images in popular culture, I would say.
Yeah, and so as I looked up Lady Bathory, I'm thinking, ooh, I'm gonna find some juicy facts for the episode. And it turns out uh, she may have been an evil lady, but it would seem that it was a Jesuit priest who invented that stuff.
Yeah. From everything that I was doing, a lot of that research, right? Like there's not excuse like I'm not trying to excuse her entirely because I'm certain, right? Like these nobles are involved in a lot of stuff, but not to the levels that they claimed against her. And there was too much money to be made. Like people, she was a widow with huge tracts of land and incredible amounts of power, right?
Oh
Sitting
yeah,
target at that time.
and they wanted to get the land from her. That was the whole goal, and so they brought in some of her maids and servants, and none of them said that she was drinking blood. One said that she hurt her finger, um, and then it went from 50 people to later on to 500 people. She was bathing in their blood. She never even took the stand,
Right.
and they ended up putting her in a castle somewhere. And the thing is, they never ended up getting her land. She ended up, her kids inheriting it. It didn't work, though they tried, you know. And Vlad Shepes, um, they ended up not getting his land either. Because what happened was when the invaders pulled up, they found what 5 to 10,000 people dying on stakes. And supposedly in history, the myth is they got on their horses and turned around and said, "This guy's too crazy."
Right.
And he had been held hostage as a kid. Him and his brother were trained in Turkey at a fortress.
Right, by the Ottoman Empire, right? Like they would have known Suleiman and all that stuff. And there's all these weird accusations because I know that uh, Vlad's brother stays in the Ottoman Empire and becomes a courtier of Suleiman. And there's all these accusations that they were lovers and that Vlad's brother may have even been made a eunuch.
Radu.
Right.
Yeah. So that's much different than the picture we see on the screen there. And it would turn out that Bram Stoker, Van Helsing, the Van Helsing, the famous character, there was a real Van Helsing. And he was actually a Jewish explorer that Bram Stoker knew. And he turned out to be involved in political espionage. And, the real story behind it is much more interesting than the black and white Dracula that we're used to.
And as far as I understand too, like Bram Stoker was like he either spent time in India or his parents were in India, but there's connection there to some of these Indian mythology as well. With the I think it's Vaskala, but if you look up Indian vampires, they have their own whole mythology that's far more similar to what we think of as vampires than what like the Greeks would have called a vampire, or people in Romania, right?
Well, and the Roma's involved in the myth too, because in the Bram Stoker stuff, there's gypsies, Romanian gypsies are involved, and Transylvania. But speaking of Transylvania, like if we want to talk about a real life Dracula in modern times, the person who bought a lot of the Transylvanian forests, he wants to be the forest steward, because after he did his DNA, he realized that he's related to Vlad Tepes. And that'd be King Charles.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he's proud of it. They did a documentary about how he's related to Vlad Tepes and his different titles and how he's the king of Jerusalem and his family. And so now he's made king, and that was his goal, was to retire in Transylvania.
Of course, that ghoul is related to Vlad Tepes. That's all I gotta say, right? Of course, they're related. Gross.
Let's go to I'll talk about it in modern times. All right, they got these people called sanguine, and that's where we got the term on the video. Sanguine is blood. Yeah, that means of blood, pertaining to blood. And in modern times, there's a group of people, just like you got modern Satanists, you'll see these different types of Baphomet type Satanists wearing all black and, the heavy metal types. There's also kind of a gothic vampire movement, and part of it looks just kind of like bubblegum and musical. But then there's people that get really deep into it. And swear that they drink blood. But when
they do, if you go into some of these deep occult groups, they're drinking blood. It's far more of a, they're doing it safely, and they're doing it as like it's also integrated with fetish and stuff. So a lot of people just write it off as that, but it's not just that.
Right. And depending on which group you go towards, it depends on how it works, whether it's a fetish group, an occult group, an OTO group,
right.
A sanguine group, because within the vampire community, not all of them drink blood.
No, because you also have the psychic vampires, right?
Yeah, and then you just got to. And then when they do it, because I graduated EMT back in the day, I was studying nursing, and they do the same thing. Make sure you clean your hands, and then they swab. They put a little lancets, and make sure you put a bacterial scrub when you're done, and it's very controlled. And what blood type are you? And compared to what we think of vampirism is, it's very controlled, sanitized. And people talk about they're looking for a chemical that the ingredient inside blood. Well, everlasting life.
Before we jump to that, I always think too of that imagery we get in Eyes Wide Shut with the sex parties and whatnot. And then I've shown you in one of the books I have by Michael Bertio, he makes reference to these. I'm not sure how true these references are because I couldn't find them. I only found them referenced in his work. But he was referencing some things that were going down in Anjou in the turn of the century, where they were doing similar rites, but that you see in Eyes Wide Shut, except that there's a vampire spin on it, where there's this master figure that's ingesting the blood of these initiates that are coming in. And these initiates are then being let out to go find new people and bring them in.
You
And I
know,
don't know
and
how, like, again, I don't know how accurate this is, but I know that people related to Michael Bertio and his groups are doing these rituals based on this stuff.
oh yeah, no, it's all over the world. You know, it's an ancient practice. It's just Hollywood and modern occultism and literature kind of changed the spin on what the ancients were doing. You know, and right there on the screen is a formula for adrenochrome. You might have heard of that. You might have heard
Right?
of
Yeah.
conspiracy
This is
videos where the rich people are, you know, harvesting babies for their adrenochrome, and you know, a
yeah.
lot
There
of
was
it
a
is.
while there where I was because for a while I was working in these occult bookshops, and I would meet all these people who talk about Q and whatnot. So then I had to start looking into it, and you inevitably come across this stuff. And I did some digging, but it's such drivel.
Right.
But the idea, as far as I understand it, with adrenal chrome, is it's like harvested from the pineal gland of brains of
Oh well, the way I know about adrenochrome is my father was a butcher and owned a slaughterhouse, and he showed me when they're slaughtering the animals that they have to shoot them in the head first. They did it with a shock bullet, like a pellet or something. And he said because otherwise the animal, the cow, would put too much adrenaline into the blood, and then it would make the meat tough, and they didn't want that because they want a double grade A beef. And so I understood that as a kid. You know, oh, okay, there's adrenaline in the blood. That is true. And that's like say a tiger when it chases its prey, the first thing it'll do when it catches it, it'll drink the blood. It ain't eating the meat, it's drinking the blood, getting high off it, and there is adrenaline in it. And it produces a chemical, it does get you high. Now, but the need to get that chemical, you could order it on the internet in a powdered form. It ain't even all the nonsense that they put it up to be. And
right.
and when you're talking about these vampire groups, if you're willingly giving your blood, there ain't all that adrenaline ain't pumping through the blood system because you're not running. It's
Right.
you know, the fight or flight response.
Right. And I was going to say, you do see several indigenous groups across the world that have these kind of rites where after they make a kill, you're supposed to drink the first blood,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's a widely accepted like thing, it's like one of these rites of passage.
Because it's a life force. You know, I'm a
Right.
vegetarian, but I'm going to acknowledge it's a life force. It
Yeah,
has
there's
power.
power in the
You know,
blood.
if
Right.
if I was in a car accident today, they took my ass to the hospital, and I woke up, I'd be hooked up some tubes with some red fluid pumping in and out. That's what's keeping me alive. Whatever, if they just had to match me up to some other person, you
Right.
know. And the blood transfusion thing is wild. When that changed the game when they invented these needles. Because up to that point, everything else back in time was through a different form of ingestion. You know, you would have to eat something. So back in the day, if they were trying to get adrenochrome, you know. So let's go to the next picture.
It's interesting though that you're saying you can just buy this stuff online. Like it's nothing special. These people are
Yeah,
crazy.
the synthetic powdered form, you know. So when you want to trace back the roots of the vampire, though, Lilith.
Right.
Lilith is an ancient form right there.
Right. I know, like, I think it's Anne Rice who makes, I don't read a lot of this stuff, but I think she makes reference in her stories as the original vampire. This has become, I know that they do that in, like, what's that RPG, The World of Darkness, which is one of the biggest role playing vampire games. They talk about Lilith or they talk about Cain. Usually you see either Cain or Lilith as the origin for these stories, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I take it back to the beginning, and a lot of people will say it's our Egypt. You know, is one of the headquarters or birthplace of this stuff. Can you go to the next picture?
Right.
Here you have Osiris. You know, good old Osiris. But supposedly they were doing blood sacrifices to Osiris. He is the god of the dead.
Okay.
You know, think about it. the god of life, resurrection, the god of the dead, you know. And a lot of the Egyptian mysteries are based on the dead. It's based on mummification and going through to the underworld and Anubis,
Right.
the necropolis.
And like when we look at a lot of these necromantic rites, they're usually based around some form of animal sacrifice, right? Like I think of the classic prototypical image within the Greek tradition is Odysseus, right? Who's instructed by Circe to dig a ditch and then to sacrifice a bunch of black animals and pour their blood into the ditch. And then the hungry ghosts come and he has to fend off the hungry ghosts and protect the blood until Tiresias and his mother can come and drink the blood, because those are the ones he wants to speak to. But it's this exchange of life for life, right?
Mm, mm. One thing, notice Osiris he's holding the crook and fail.
Right.
Like we'll talk about that a little later in the video, but just, putting that in the back of your mind. So right. Yeah, there's also Lamia from Libya.
Yeah.
Who was a semen demon, supposedly, as well, stealing semen and blood.
Yeah, Lamia, and there's Lamia and there's Lilith, right? And Lilith. There's this whole idea of these female demons who come at night, and they were responsible for things like they're responsible for men having wet dreams, or people who were assigned male at birth having wet dreams, and they would be responsible for miscarriages as well, or stillborns, right?
Oh yeah.
So these were really terrifying female demons, the Lilith in Lamia.
And speaking of miscarriages, blood flow, controlling blood flow, that was the woman's art back in the day, birth, because there'd be a lot of miscarriages. It was a natural thing. That's the medicine comes out of that, childbirth, and blood, controlling blood flow. Are inducing blood flow to help push out the baby. And miscarriages were saved as well in Eden. Several different cultures around the world do that up to this day, even. And even I think they still talk about that with doctors, to eat your fetus in modern times.
I know they talk about eating the placenta. I don't know about the fetus.
I mean, did I say fetus? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I meant placenta. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But in ancient times, you would eat the fetus.
Yeah. But lots of modern people still eat the placenta, and that's a widely done practice,
Oh, I said fetus. I meant placenta.
Yeah, no one in modern times is eating a fetus like that. That's yeah.
Right. They banned that practice, a few years back. So yeah, let's go to the next picture.
Instead, they're harvesting them for stem cells. Right?
Yeah. You just get them a different way. We know that the blood was used on everything. Besides olive oil, they were also anointing blood on everything. Here's Hebrews 9:22 talking about everything has to be cleansed with blood. Right. And they would put it on altars, on places, over different items. Let's go to the next picture. Yeah, there they are. That's those are called the horns of the altar. Altars had horns on them. And originally they used to be animals, like a deer horns or goat horns or something. But the horns of the altar, and they're putting blood on it. And this is to consecrate these items and make them sacred. Anointing these sacred biblical items. Let's go to even the next picture. And everybody will recognize this one. You got to put blood on the door. Yeah, and that'll protect you by putting blood on the door itself, from the evil demons coming. So we're seeing that blood has a power, a very special power. And you put blood on people. You would anoint and sprinkle people with blood as well.
Oh.
Yeah, let's go to the next picture.
Yeah, like it protects you from evil Yahweh coming to eat your children, right? The blood, or at least from his spirits coming to eat your children.
Well, the thing that you say about Yahweh is that, okay, when I checked into it, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to look at all these sacrifice stuff in the Bible. And what turns out, though, they're not eating the blood.
Oh.
No. I thought they would be. I'm like, yeah, look at all that usage of blood.
Right.
No, don't eat the blood. No, there's so many quotes saying that you got to drain the animals of their blood before you can eat it.
Right, I do remember that. That's like that's a whole mitzvah thing. Like, they have all these rites about doing it. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, they don't want no. The blood is for anointing. That's Yahweh's blood. Yahweh gets the blood.
Right, interesting.
You don't get the blood. You can eat the flesh. In different parts of the flesh, but it's Yahweh that gets the blood. And
it's so interesting.
Oh yeah, no, there's more to the story, which you'll figure out a little later, and so here we have Leviticus, and they're talking about the priest should put some blood on the horns of the altar again, of the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, because there was an altar of incense. And now we're going to get into, all right, we talked about in previous episodes the senses, and now we're kind of like, senses of blood, taste of blood, smell of blood, can you hear blood?
Sight of blood.
Yeah. And it says you could hear blood, it says like in the Watchers, was that Enoch, and it says that the blood of the earth cried out and the angel heard it.
Think about this, right? Like if you look at something like the Holy of Holies, it's a sensory deprivation chamber, okay? It's a massive stone box in which these people are going in. If you're sitting in there by yourself, I've done this, put myself in these sensory deprivation. After a while, all you hear is your own pulse or your own breathing. It's wild.
Yeah. And so that's hearing the blood or hearing your pulse. But now we're talking about smelling blood, because part of sacrificing the animals, see the way that, because not everybody sacrifices the same way. It's a grisly subject, so we just kind of like, they just make blood and they do something bad. But no, it's very specific on what everyone's doing. In certain cases, they're sacrificing an animal, they're draining the blood, that they're burning the animal, all parts of it. Because that's how Yahweh consumes the sacrifices through smoke. Everything has to be burnt. They burn it, and then you put blood, and then you can put blood into the incense as well, or onto the fire, and that's a whole nother thing that we're dealing with there.
Right. You see the same things with the Indian sacrifices, the homa, the fire sacrifice, where everything that they're burning is being consumed. And I mean, most of them are not doing anything animal today, at least not for any of the Sanskrit or Vedic gods. But, right, like they are burning, though, the offerings whole, right? And there's this understanding, at least in the Vedic tradition, that the fire is Agni, the messenger of the gods, right? And he is the one who sends everything. So often people even burn their prayers or burn everything, to the gods.
Mm-hmm. So let's hit the next picture. It's so in ancient Greece, there's several gods that have to sacrifice, because they need the blood, and part of it is the blood. And so I'll show you. You have Apollo on the left, Dionysus in the middle, and Orpheus on the right. And Orpheus has to sacrifice a black bull to rescue his wife in the underworld, because he has to add the blood of the black bull to the incense. That's what got me started, because when I was just looking it up as in terms of like, okay, which great gods sacrifice and they needed the blood, but it's what they did with the blood afterwards that intrigued me, which was then he had to take the blood of the black bull and put it into the fire with the incense. to be
Interesting.
absorbed to the smell. And then I started asking AI questions. Of course, it's not going to give me the answer right away. And you have to, and even then, when I ask it almost the same question twice, it'll say no. And then I got 3 different responses dealing with blood and the smell of blood and how the human body reacts to burning blood. And it makes you dizzy, can get you high. And part of that, though, is carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide. I was like, what? And something called methaglobin. It's like not methamphetamine, but hemoglobin. And so when smoke is burnt, it converts back to its organic elements, carbon and carbon monoxide. And so whatever it is, and it does get you high, get you dizzy, and it can kill you as well. And in ancient times, if something makes you dizzy, that's a drug. And to some people, that's a good thing in ancient times. They don't care what it is that's making you dizzy. It's making you dizzy. Like people that sniff paint or whatever, they just want to feel dizzy. Well, burning the blood does that as well. So we're not just talking about blood on the fire as a symbolic or element, but now as a psychoactive compound. Yeah, and it could do that. And so also Artemis, they were doing sacrifices with Artemis, but she liked birds, or fowl was her preferred sacrifice. Let's hit the next picture.
Interesting. Because I know like Aphrodite was not too keen on sacrifices usually. Like each god is different, right?
So here they're sacrificing to Apollo, and through fumigation sacrifice. Because you're sacrificing, but what do you do with the sacrifice? And then, some sacrifices they bury in the ground. That we call that a funeral. Like the Vikings funeral is they burn you. They put you on a boat and burn you.
Right.
With a bunch of herbs and smells. And it's like a barbecue. Now imagine, you ever been walking by a barbecue and it smells good?
Oh, yeah.
That's just roasting animal. That's just roasting flesh.
True.
Did you know if it was a human or a pig or a goat or what's on there, if it's seasoned right with garlics and stuff, just by smell, I'm saying, you're olfactory.
Right. Well, there's even a lot of speculation that like there's a reason why the slang term for human meat is long pig. And there's a lot of speculation around the similarities between pork and human flesh. And that could be possibly one of the reasons why several cultures abstain from pork. It's because of its similarities to human meat.
Yeah, definitely. And so imagine the smoke there. It has the sacrifice along with different herbs and the smell of blood, cannabis, all kinds of herbs.
Right.
Yeah, the gods likes the herbs. It gets them high.
We also got to remember, right, in this ancient world, most things are going to smell absolutely terrible, right? Most people are going to smell terrible. Most things, right? Like you're going to be dealing with animal feces and whatnot, but you go into the temple and it's going to smell like incense and flowers, right? And cannabis. It's going to smell wild compared to the outside world.
Oh, yeah. So let's hit the next picture.
Right.
So Hecate, yeah, and her temple. That's one of her temples in Turkey. And with Hecate and blood, I found different references that say that they were doing sacrifices and drinking blood at the Hecate temples, and it was outlawed in Greece to do that. That you weren't supposed to consume blood. You could sacrifice animals to different gods. It's like we talked about even the pederasty back in the day. It was like they had different rules of what you could do and what you couldn't do. They had different rules there with animal sacrifice, what you could do and couldn't do. Or you couldn't sacrifice humans, or the state could sacrifice a human at different festivals. And it's what you do with the sacrifice and the blood afterwards. That's, like I said, it's very intriguing.
We do know though that the Greeks were doing this thing where they were drinking the cow bowl, like the cow blood, and several famous people die. Like they go and do the cow drinking the blood right of the cow, and then they don't come back. You know, it was radically dangerous to do this right where you ingest the cow blood.
And this comes from the Mithraic liturgy. You know, this is ancient Mithra stuff. The main element of the story is slaying the bull, and the first thing you hunter does when they slay the animals is take the blood.
The blood, yeah, drink the warm
But
blood.
imagine if you biotransform the animal first,
Right.
you know, which is non-ethical. That's why regular people can't figure out the past, because the past isn't ethical. That's
No,
not
they
how the
don't
past works, you know.
have.
But I'm pretty sure the Mithraic priest would feed that sacred bull that has been, and, you know, and these animals they kill, this ain't just your ghetto bull off the street. You know, they take care of these animals. This is husbandry. You know, they take care of them. They feed them sacred foods, and they can give them a bunch of psychoactive herbs, anything. Poppies, cannabis, ephedra, mushrooms. And
Blood
then when they
eaters are
sacrifice it and take the blood, you're going to get that. That's why
right.
the blood is in your system, or the drugs are in your blood. It goes through your system. It's stuck in there.
And I got to imagine that people are like, they're finding this out just naturally because we look at, there's like in Africa, they still have several of these horse tribes cow tribes where these people are semi nomadic and they're running the bulls and they live off of the bull. And what does that mean when they say they live off the bull? It means that they take like the middle aged cows and they drain them of partially of their blood every month, and then they take that and they make that into food. They drink it, they turn it into cakes, they mix it with the milk, you know. So they're that's everything. And then they're using like the cow dung and stuff. Like there's a whole group of people around the world. There's still in India people who do this, right? It's only the modern Hindus who now have abstained from the blood, right? But if you go back classically, these people were living off of these cows in every sense. You know, the cows provided them with everything they needed. That's why they're so sacred, right?
Yeah, and I know in some traditions they would take their animals and take their blood, but not kill them. They poke
That's
them.
what I'm talking about.
Oh,
They just prick them.
Yeah, just do a little sucking of it, just to keep enough to stay alive. They're not trying to kill them.
No,
they want them to keep going, just enough.
Yeah, there's these, you can see it in Africa. There's these special these bulls, and they'll do it right on the side of the neck, and they'll go in, and then it's like a faucet, and then they'll drain it into these cups, and they'll drink it fresh, even right, like the young male hunters while they're out there protecting these cows, you know, and it's just how they do it. And you got to imagine, like, there would have been many different tribal groups doing this all around the world, right? Who knows what else they were doing with the blood, baking it into various things, transforming it into various things. And then, like you said, they're nomadic peoples. The cows are running around eating all kinds of stuff. You know that mushrooms are growing in the cow dung, right? Who knows, right?
So let's hit the next picture.
Oh, Chinnamasi.
Yeah, you know, that looks like some blood right there.
Right. So yeah, in the Indian traditions, it gets really complicated, right? So blood sacrifice is Bali, and generally you don't see modern blood sacrifices with any of the Sanskrit or like the Vedic kind of style gods, the popular gods. You see still a lot of blood sacrifice with the tribal gods, the local gods, a lot of the goddess worship. There are certain gods that do want blood, famously Kali in various forms of Shakti. So this is Chinnamasi. This is a form of Shakti that comes out of the tantric tradition, right? She's arising as a result of the lovemaking of that couple, right? But it's a very, like, you would basically in the Indian tradition, sacrifice or yajna is hugely important. And they would divide it between vegetal, and then there's like 4 types, and then there's animal. And it's all this really complicated stuff about how you're supposed to burn it. And it really, like, again, when we're talking about India, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of different traditions, right? and each of them has their own slightly different various ways of doing it. Like I was kind of familiar with a little bit of what they were doing in Bengal with Kali, where they're doing these sacrifices. And they're also sacrificing to the god of Saturn, which I'm trying to remember. What's that god's name? Shani. And they would erect, which is interesting because it relates to what we talk about here. They would erect these black stones, and then they would do the Bali animal sacrifice to the black stone, and that represents Saturn, right? Who they view as like an old man riding a raven with like a limp. Sound like anyone you know.
No.
It gets so wild. And there's also I think it's like Amit. I'm trying to. There's Atma. There's also Atma Bali, which is a little more rare, where people are like cutting their chests open and they're offering their own blood to the goddess as like a personal sacrifice. And people only do this in like the most extreme of occasions, when they're truly desperate. There's a really famous example of this is with Ramakrishna, where he decided he was going to meditate unto death until he saw Kali, and she wasn't coming and he's starving. So out of desperation, he grabs one of the swords that she holds from the Murti, the idol, and he starts cutting off his own head. And he gets part of the way through before she shows up, and then he stops. And he has this big, huge scar on his neck for the rest of his life as a sign of his devotion, you know?
Mm. Well, I noticed you said Bengal. I think last week we talked a little bit about the balls of Bengal.
Right.
And they have a rite when the daughter's first menses, the whole family shares it and drinks it in a ritual.
Amazing.
Yeah. Let's hit the next picture.
Yeah, lots of blood drinking, right? It's a part of the yajna, the sacrifices. They're doing it to these local deities, to these tribal deities, and to these deities related to the mother goddess.
And also in Tibetan Tantra, they take blood pills. That these little pills they take. Some of them with coral and turquoise, but some of them have body parts of saints, menses, blood. These magic Tibetan pills. They're
doing cannibalism too, right? We talked about that before.
Yeah. So now we're going to get into a little bit about biotransformation, because we got this quote from the Bible. I could see that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and witnesses for Jesus. And I was utterly amazed at the sight of her. Revelation. And drunk with the blood of the saints, because the saints take a special diet and special herbs. And does their blood get you high?
I just keep thinking of Paul, right? Paul, we know he doesn't even get affected by the snakes, right? When they bite him. So if that's the saint, right? You're drinking his blood, right? It's bio something.
Yeah. We talked about urine. You could take urine and milk, like the cow's milk or cow's urine, just 20% of ergotamine, the rye, and it's your blood. Can get you high. Now imagine if you did a blood transfusion with somebody that was an alcoholic, that was completely schnockered, or especially proteins. Drugs that are protein. They're locked by the proteins. Ones that are not protein stable, they piss out faster. But the ones that are bond to protein staying, that's like poppies and cannabis. It likes the fat.
Like there's those famous myths, like it's largely been proven to be a myth, but like that LSD or LSA will stay in your fat, and then you can potentially have a flashback. You don't really get full-on flashbacks from what I've read. It's more people get a buzzing feeling. But yeah, it does stay in your fat.
Yeah. So blood does have power. We know that. The ancients worshipped it. Let's hit the next picture.
All right.
Oh, here we got Lady Babylon.
With her cup.
Drunk on blood. vampirism.
Right.
This is isn't that Dracula drunk on the blood?
Well, it's also it's just I keep thinking that imagery. Christ is feeding everyone his blood, so to be drunk on the blood is to be drunk on the blood of Christ. Isn't this supposed to be a good
Right,
thing? Yet she's the villain in the Christian story, right?
right. It's like who can take blood? Who's allowed to take blood and who's allowed to give blood?
Right.
That's what it turns out. So with the next picture, and now we're going to get into, with the Eucharist, with taking blood, it's always hand in hand with baptism, a lot of it. And so there's something that's called blood baptism, or baptized by blood. And that's what the saints are. They're baptized by blood because they give their blood for Christ. And that's how they become a saint. But in this one case, there was her name's what? Emerithiana, Saint Emerithiana. And you can see she has her little thing. She's taking Eucharist, like little cakes, to some of the
Right.
Christians, and she isn't fully baptized yet. And so they try to get her to give up the Eucharist. Some pagans, they catch her and they're attacking her, and she won't give it up. She'd die before she would surrender the Eucharist. But she's not baptized either. And so it's said that she's baptized in her own blood. As they whip her and beat her, her own blood washes over her, and that's what baptizes her, through her own blood.
That's so amazing. Wow.
And it said that when they finally did open up her bag to steal the Eucharist had disappeared.
That's crazy. Okay, also just everyone should just look at this painting because it is so beautiful. And like what is going on in the background? It looks like there's like someone praying, and then there's someone standing over them with their hand above their head in like a menacing way, and it looks like there's a bird cage.
Well,
And then
that's
often
her.
yeah.
That's her being killed in the background. That was what happened. Is they get her because she won't give up the Eucharist, the secret of the Eucharist, and and that's called blood baptism. Because the blood is so powerful. You could do so much things with this blood.
Also, you notice that there's like a cow off to the right, and there's a
Mhm.
wall. What's going on with the cow in the wall?
Definitely. So because we talked about different Eucharist legends before, that it could be sperm, it could be sperm, it could be saliva, it could be blood, and it could literally just be the literal blood itself, or a disciple or apostle's blood. Because we talked about something called chain transmission, which is where they pass down the semen from Jesus to the disciple, and then from the disciples to the bishops, and from the bishops to the flock. Well, you can do the same thing with the blood, in that imagine his disciples that took the blood at the Last Supper, and you were ready to take the communion, make a little slit, and you would drink of it. And through chain transmission, you would get the blood of Christ passed down into you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that really reminds me of a lot of these guru lineages traditions that we see in India, or in the Islamic Sufi orders, or similar type things.
And they really wanted that blood. Let's we talked about Lady Bathory, and the thing is, turns out she wasn't bathing in blood because she was young when she died. She didn't need to. And here, go to the next picture. We'll talk a little bit about Muhammad and the relationship with blood, drinking Muhammad's blood. Because we talk about drinking Jesus' blood. What happens when you drink Muhammad's blood? Muhammad used to do something that was called cupping, moxibustion, where you put the hot
You'll see this. Yeah, you'll see this today in a lot of Chinese or South Asian style massage and like wellness spas, where what they do is they take these glass cups, and then they take a light like a flame, and they put it in there, it creates suction, and they put it on your back. And the idea is that it will cause the skin to bunch up into the cup, and then it will suck out toxins from your back.
Yeah, it also draws the blood to the surface.
Yeah, it causes bruising.
Yeah, or some cases blood.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, the person doing it, Muhammad told him to get rid of the blood. And so they went out back and they drank the blood and came back in. And Muhammad said, "What did you do?" And he goes, "Well, I didn't want to spill your blood on the ground. It's too precious." And he tells them, because of that, you're now going to be protected from fire. You know, because that's what happens when you drink Muhammad's blood. We talked about what happens when you drink his piss. That's it. You could type that in on Google. What happens when you drink his piss? We talked about Muhammad's saliva and his grandkid's mouth. He spit in his mouth like Jesus would spit. You know, different body parts, different fluids, different powers.
What's interesting about the blood is that it reminds me of what we hear about Medea, right? And that her blood also causes you to not get consumed by fire, right? And she is the originator of the mystery. So that's some interesting stuff right there.
Yeah, so they really want the blood of these prophets. Let's go to the next picture.
All right.
Yeah. And that's the Eucharist. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood gets eternal life. Because my blood is the true drink. You know, that sounds like Dracula to me. But
yeah.
Just, and the Babylonian harlot's not allowed to drink the blood, but though all of his followers should drink the blood. So it's a very confusing mixed message about his blood. But let's go to one more picture. We still got a few more pictures. Let's bring it home. Oh, so here's his blood.
Ooh, what's going on here? What are they bathing in there? Is that a big bath? Is that a hot tub filled with blood?
Oh,
like,
yeah. Spring break. Just bring it on. Bring it on. No. They're having look at that. They wanted the blood.
That's some crazy. That is such. They're having a whole on Bacchic frenzy. They're bathing and having a pool party. They're splashing in it. One girl's combing her hair with it.
Oh yeah, Lady Bathory. Forget Lady Bathory. Look at this. This is their Christian mythology. You know.
Talk about calling the kettle back. They blame that poor woman, stole her land, or tried to take her land. They locked her up into a castle until she died, saying she did this, and here they are glorifying it in their art. Aren't you supposed to bathe in blood? Like, what the frig?
Oh yeah. You know, let's hit one more picture.
That's some wild. Wow.
You know, we talked about lactognosis in one of our earlier videos. How Bernard of Clairvaux, you know.
Yeah, drinking from the Virgin Mary.
From her breast. Well, in this one, you could see the breast she's putting into the fountain some of her breast milk that could be biotransformed plants. And then on the left there, you see blood going into the fountain. And at the bottom, you can see they're bottling up or getting into little cups and feeding it to the lowly people in hell. And there's a dove at the top as well.
Yeah, that's Aphrodite Urania.
yeah. So I like in this one that we could see that it's a blending of both their fluids.
Yeah,
results in a process, an alchemical process that's transformed through the fountain.
Yeah, wow. Right, and again, it's this imagery of like this fountain or this grail. Like, what's going on with that?
Oh yeah. You know, let's hit the next picture. So, Saint Ephraim. This is around what 330 AD, somewhere around there, I think, is Saint Ephraim, the Syrian. And in Iraq is a monastery of Bar Manham. And at this monastery is a gate. And on the gate, and this is a Christian monastery, is snakes that are putting their venom into a cup on each side of the gate. And what's ironic about that is he talks about, and they wrote about, how the Eucharist is connected through the Akkadian and through ancient language to snakes. It's a snake venom. So that's what he writes about in 330, that when you were taking the Eucharist, you were taking Jesus' blood is a snake venom or snake antidote.
Wild.
Yeah. I went back and I looked at it and I was reading a lot about it. It's the word Sama, Samma. And that's a serpentine power. And it can be a remedy. And so when you were taking the Eucharist, his blood is a serpentine venom.
Okay, I wonder if that word Sama relates to Salome. That's so interesting, because Ammon was talking about how the word Salome means like some kind of antidote to snake venom.
Yeah.
He's going to do more about that in the next Lady Babylon episode, but interesting.
Yeah, and then, like I said, at that monastery where they talk about this snake venom in his blood, they have the reliefs of the snakes putting their venom into cups because they're collecting it. It's like Asclepius.
Right.
Yeah. So, let's hit the next picture.
Freaking wild.
So, the flailing of Jesus with blood. Here, we're a couple videos back, we talked about collecting the temple incense, the laudanum, with the flail. And they would put that, a small one, onto the goat's beard, because the goats would graze on the plant and then collect all the resin in their beard. And that was synonymous with the pharaohs.
Yeah, so if you don't understand it, it kind of looks like the flails in this drawing here, but with far more leather straps that would have knots tied into it usually. And then they would take it like a rake and they would whip it through these fields of these plants or on these trees to collect all the sap so that you don't get covered in it, right?
Well, and that was the pharaohs who were supposed to have done that. And that was synonymous with being the pharaoh, because that incense that was collected was for them to take and to mix with smoke and with blood on the fire. And let's get the next picture.
Interesting.
And so there they are collecting it, and that's the crook and fail. Remember I showed you Osiris had that, and the pharaohs had that. And that's supposed to be also symbolic of Jesus, because he's the shepherd. He holds that staff. And then that flail is what they get him with.
Right.
And to get it, and it's ironic because the name of the resin they collect, if you want to hit the next picture, it's called the tears of Osiris, or the tears of Christ. Is that resin that they're hitting with the flail. But when they're hitting Jesus with the flail, the blood they collect is the tears of Christ as well, because they want to collect his blood. Because remember, it had the sacred oils in his blood that they wanted to take, because they want his blood at that point.
This is another example of mimesis, right? Like they're clearly invoking this earlier image of Osiris here. And it's like, wow.
And Saint's got to collect my blood. His blood is like the temple incense.
Right.
When they put the blood on the fire as well. And this is, one more picture. So in ancient times, they have something called the Festival of Holy Blood up to modern times. And they're still doing it. We showed where they collected, they thought they had his foreskin, and they'd worship his foreskin. Well, in Burgess, of course I didn't say that right, it's Bruges or something. Yeah.
Bruges. Yeah, Belgium.
They have a festival once a year where they worship something in a tube that they say is his blood that they collected.
Whose blood do you got there?
And you can worship it all year long. Just once a year, they bring it out and have a parade of the sacred blood.
Catholic,
and some people say it was collected when they mummified them. They collected, or when they were whipping them, they collected the tears of Christ. You know,
Interesting.
yeah, the magic power of the blood. You know, there's so many different legends out there. It would take hours and hours to talk about this, but fortunately, we're going to talk about it tomorrow. You know, Witches Symposium.
Yeah. So for tomorrow, as always, we're going to unpack this episode further with our good friends Ammon from Lady Babylon and Neil from Gnostic Informant and our partner in crime, Wretch. So that'll be really interesting because those three always bring crazy sources, you know, and they're all experts in their own right. So make sure you turn in tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern for that. It's gonna be intense, you know, and this is like Ammon's special pet project, basically bodily fluids. So you know we're gonna get him going.
Oh yeah. You know, make sure you like and subscribe. Definitely share this because, you know, I doubt that the algorithm wants to share this, you know, but
Yeah, we're
tell
getting
your
a little
friends.
racy. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. And yeah, any last words, Dion?
Yeah, the sacred blood. You know, what can I say?
Right? Blood is life, you know? And this is okay, like sacrifice, right? This is primordial. All of these human cultures are doing it. People ingest blood. They do weird things with blood. We're not singling anyone out. This is as human as it gets. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow, 4 p.m. for Witches Symposium. So thanks again. Peace and love. Hail Satan.
Oh.